Well, thank you for joining us and the panel today to discuss the future trends in energy bills. And I just want to take the time to thank our gold sponsors, CitiPower and Solar Victoria, for the event today. So it's fantastic to see everyone, your commitment to turning up and discussing the issues. This is the second year Electrify Boroondara is happening, and sharing your knowledge and adding your voice to the call is fundamental because it all starts in our homes and our communities. So I'm Stephanie Bashir. I'm the chair of the panel session this afternoon. And it is such a privilege to be here again this year, and it's fantastic to see the Boroondara community leading the charge with these events. Because consumer preferences are leading the charge, as we see here in the community of Boroondara. The availability of rooftop solar, home battery storage and other digital technologies is enabling customers to exert more control over their energy usage. And although energy remains an essential service, and we will hear from the panel later, customers have greater power and choice as to how that service is delivered. And having been in the heart of the energy industry for the last 2 decades, I have been involved and seen a lot of change. You know, a decade ago, the choice for customers was simply who sold them energy. Now the choice is who and how, and increasingly when they will be supported by online services, how do they use their technologies to get value and reduce their bills, and how do they monitor and control their usage, and increasingly, how do they share energy and share in the value streams beyond the home. So all of that and more this afternoon. And we are privileged a set of speakers on this panel who have unrivaled knowledge and experience to share with us. So the session will run roughly till 4:15 this afternoon. And before I introduce the stellar panel that we've got, please get your questions ready. We want to make sure that this last panel session is as interactive as the earlier sessions, especially when we're talking about energy bills, everyone's favorite topic. So our first speaker this afternoon, I'll introduce all the speakers and then they'll come on stage. So our first speaker is Tristan Edis, who is the Director, Analysis and Advisory at Green Energy Markets. Tristan's involvement in the clean energy sector and related government climate change and energy policy issues began back in 2000. So Tristan is then followed by Stan Krpan, who is the CEO of Solar Victoria. Stan is responsible for the delivery of the Victorian Government's flagship 1.3 billion solar homes program and a range of household incentive programs. Prior to this, Stan was the CEO of Sustainability Victoria for 8 years. And then lastly, Mark de Villiers, who is the head of pricing at CitiPower and is part of the team that develops 5-year plans for CitiPower. Mark is an engineer and leading expert with over 30 years' experience in the energy industry. So to kick us off, welcome Tristan.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thank you all for coming along. All right, so my job today is to talk about what might be in store for your electricity bill or your gas bill. Of course, this is a mug's game projecting these things, and I've been wrong, as have many experts in this area. So take it with a grain of salt, but I'll do my best to give you a bit of insight into what might be in store into the future. So the last 2 years have been truly horrific in terms of increases in electricity and gas bills for that matter, but particularly electricity. And but in terms of electricity, I think I can be reasonably confident in saying things are going to get better. Prices should come down. Retail gas prices, on the other hand, I don't think look quite so optimistic. So the first thing is the Ukraine war and the Russian withdrawal of their gas supplies, but also their coal, but mainly their gas supplies, led to an astronomical adjustment in international prices for particularly gas, but then that flowed through also to thermal coal prices. And even though these are international prices, so this is gas in this particular chart where you can see that sort of spike upwards in late 2021 and 2022, they flow through directly to Australian prices. So even though Australia has plentiful supplies of gas and also thermal coal, our prices are dictated by international prices because we can export to overseas countries. So we saw a huge spike in the price of gas, and this is the price of thermal coal in this chart. And again, we saw a huge spike in the price of thermal coal internationally. And they were the things that drove up electricity prices over the last 2 years. This flowed through to the cost of generating electricity in coal generators, and they increased their bid prices substantially, as did gas-fired generators, and that was the main reason that flowed through to electricity prices rising in the last 2 years. The positive, though, is that new technology, if you are able to do it, if you're able to install solar, you're not a renter, for example, but we could always get landlords to install solar if we were prepared to cajole them. But nonetheless, we've seen an ongoing substantial reduction in the price of solar panels. They did stall for a little bit over a 2-year period. There was a little bit of a COVID influence there with supply chain constraints that led to a stalling in panel prices, but then this year they have just absolutely plummeted. And also batteries, we saw some inflationary effects that happened around probably 18 months ago to 24 months ago. Battery cell prices actually went up a little bit after having a long downward trajectory, but then they absolutely plummeted again this year. So the long-term downward trajectory says this is an optimistic side for this industry, and ultimately that's something that is open to a number of consumers to help them control their electricity bill, is to opt for solar, and hopefully with these ongoing reductions in battery prices, they will hopefully flow through to residential battery system prices. That hasn't happened yet, but it should be just a matter of time. And I suppose the other thing is that it's flowing through to the price of electric vehicles, which is another way that you can control your energy bill in terms of petrol prices. So that is a positive story there. And based on analysis from current prices, so this is from CSIRO, we know that there are, even taking into account the extra cost of the equipment to go all electric, including mainly the vehicle, overall households are financially better off, and that is going to improve over time as the cost of particularly electric vehicles comes down. And so overall household energy bills can come down as people electrify their loads and get out of gas and get out of petrol-fuelled vehicles. So that's the positive story there. The other thing is, as people use electric vehicles or electrify their gas loads, it has an interesting side benefit, which is most of the cost associated with a large proportion of your electricity bill is embedded within the cost of the poles and wires, and those costs are largely fixed irrespective of how much electricity flows over those poles and wires. And so this is some modelling that was done by CSIRO, that the black line is electricity consumption and the light blue line is the revenue that the electricity distributors are presumed to get. And as electricity consumption goes up, if the cost of the overall poles and wires stays steady, then prices should come down. They're likely to go up in the short term because of rising interest rates and also some replacement of assets. Now, this is an Australia-wide figure. It's not specific to CitiPower. Here, this is more of a national projection here around that. But nonetheless, it's a positive story that the cost of poles and wires should come down per unit of electricity as we increase electricity consumption. But in terms of gas, as we shift, they have the opposite going on, where as you shift out of gas to electricity, you've got these high fixed costs in the pipelines. They've still got to recover those costs. And so this green here is the cost of the pipeline. So if you stay on gas and you don't electrify, then there's going to be a sting in the tail, which is you're going to bear a greater proportion of the cost of the gas pipelines. So that's it for me, and thanks for coming along.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark de Villiers from CitiPower. So, as most of you will know, electricity is first generated. If it's generated a long way from where it's used, it has to be transmitted at high voltage over transmission towers, and then distributed over poles and wires and through transformers to homes and businesses. As you can see, CitiPower fits in the distribution side of things. Now, as everyone knows, we have a lot of solar, rooftop solar being installed, which is with excess power being pushed onto the network. And what that means is that now the network has to manage electricity flowing in both directions. So CitiPower, I'm not going to go through this, don't worry. CitiPower does a lot of things. But I thought I'd just focus on some interesting stats. So we can see in Boroondara about 65,000 customers. Of those, about 8,000 have solar, which is actually a lower proportion than the average for Victoria, probably about half. And if you were in the previous session, it was kind of hypothesised that it was because of the heritage issues in the area, and also the sort of wealth effect. People didn't feel the need to install solar. In terms of EVs, about 2,600, which is, as a proportion of the population, actually very high, which is also unsurprising in this area. So your electricity bill recovers all the costs through the supply chain. Tristan was speaking about some of those. So generation, the network, costs, which are transmission and distribution. There are some government renewable and energy efficiency scheme rebates that get recovered as well, and retail costs, marketing, billing, call centre type costs. So a retailer aggregates all of those into your electricity bill. Once a year, the Victorian government calculates a sort of reference set of electricity prices, which they call the Victorian default offer. And that sort of forms a reference point for retailers to offer discounts. In the current year, I guess those reference prices have been multiplied by a typical electricity consumption to give you a typical breakdown of electricity bill in terms of the costs. Obviously, everyone uses very different amounts of electricity, so it's going to vary wildly, but it's really the breakdown that's of more interest here. So the network comprises about a third of the bill today, and then generation a little bit less than that. As Tristan pointed out, a year or two ago, that was quite different. Generation was a lot higher. Generation is quite volatile, whereas the other costs are a bit more stable. So by 2031 in Victoria, well, really you just need to go and look in the Expo hall to see, what's going to be happening over the next sort of 5 or so years. But we are going to have population growth, electric vehicle sales, probably a doubling of rooftop solar, increased uptake of home batteries and grid batteries. Most new homes are going to be all electric, and many houses are going to be transitioning from gas to electricity. So in this context, CitiPower has undertaken research into customer priorities. And there are really sort of 3 key priorities. The first one is reliability, safety and resilience to extreme weather events. And I guess we've been reminded about that a week ago. The next one is affordable electricity, and CitiPower's prices are the second cheapest in Australia. And I should say CitiPower is the most reliable network in Australia. And the third one is about the energy transition. So CitiPower has plans to really keep electricity supply reliable and keep it affordable and meet all the needs of the energy transition, so connecting more solar, electric vehicles, batteries, etc., and integrating them into the grid. And to keep electricity affordable, I guess CitiPower has a whole list of initiatives which are all about using the existing network as efficiently as we can and not sort of over-investing in the network or making expensive network investments. I'm not going to go through each of them individually, but if you are interested to learn more, please go to engage.power.com.au. We, on Tuesday, are publishing our sort of next 5-year plans. So we're very excited about that and interested to hear from anyone. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Stan Krpan, the CEO of Solar Victoria with the Victorian Government. And can I just say at the outset, congratulations to Carolyn, to Mark and the team at Electrify Boroondara, 100 volunteers. What a fantastic event. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here today, but Carolyn's very persuasive. Last year, sorry, but Carolyn's very persuasive, and I was just absolutely delighted to get the invite to come today. I'm not going to talk about energy bills, but what I will talk about is how to reduce energy bills in the context of solar, and then what our customers tell us from about 300,000 installations of solar since we started Solar Victoria back in 2018, what they tell us they're looking forward to in terms of electrification and how they can save money on their power bills. Solar Victoria has been around since 2018. As Stephanie said, it's a flagship program of the Victorian Government, 1.3 billion, still the largest sustainability program in the country for households. 1.3 billion over 10 years. We're in our 6th year, and I'll take you through some of what's been achieved. But essentially, we do a number of things, but one of them is to obviously provide financial incentives, rebates and interest-free loans to support customers to take up solar, batteries, energy-efficient hot water. We've also done low-income household retrofits and work in public and social housing. We've got a program that supports renters and also have a project that is looking at electrification of innovative precincts and developments, and about 7 successful projects that were announced just a few months ago, including with AusNet and others. And I think if you were out at the Expo, you might have seen some of the projects there trying to recruit new customers. We also provide training and workforce development for the workforce of the future, particularly electricians, plumbers, supporting plumbers to be familiar with more efficient electric alternatives to traditional gas boosted hot water, which most of us, at least half of Victorian households, currently depend on. We also do an audit program that gives you some assurance that if you've been able to access a Solar Victoria rebate and install solar or a battery or a hot water system, that it's been done safely and with quality in mind. And we audit still to this day 5% of all of the installations. So that's about 18,000 audits so far, and through that have worked really closely in partnership with the industry to improve standards and quality and safety for both solar, for batteries, and then also for hot water installations. Our current offers continue at $1,400 as a rebate on a new solar PV system of whatever size you choose, whatever suits you. In that context, you can also take an interest-free loan for 4 years for the same value, so up to $1,400, which is able to be obviously aggregated. And if you look at some of the smaller and cheaper systems, essentially you can still buy a solar PV system in Victoria with zero upfront if you combine the two rebates. But for $1,000 to $2,000, you're sort of upgrading then to a larger system, which is becoming increasingly more popular. We offer $1,000. All of these are means tested, so for a household income up to $210,000, which 80% of Victorian households qualify for the rebates. So quite a retail offer in that sense of the word. $1,000 for hot water, up to $8,800 as an interest-free loan for batteries, We also now double the rebate amount for apartments, including some apartments that have now been approved to take up the offer in Boroondara. And we've had almost 400 owners, corporations and buildings now sign up to take the solar for apartments rebate up, and that's about 5,000 apartments that will benefit from that. And given that about half of Victoria's apartments are rented, it benefits not only this hard-to-reach sector that has traditionally not benefited from solar, but then also benefits renters who are obviously exposed not only to increased rents, but also to higher energy prices. Last year we had our biggest year on record, just under 80,000 Victorians supported under the various programs we administer. And this year we're expecting to exceed that again with more than 80,000 applications approved. We also, since June this year, administer the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program, which is the largest energy efficiency program in the country. It's about $600 million per year that is invested in this scheme, which supports both households and businesses to reduce their energy footprint, whether electricity or gas, but increasingly is moving towards electrification of homes and providing incentives and in a more accessible way. You might be familiar with the person that was in the past 10 years or so coming to knock on your door and offer you draft proofing or window sealing, that sort of thing. All of that's really important, but increasingly we're seeing that electrification, most of that low-hanging fruit for energy efficiency has been picked, if you like, and that people are looking to more efficient homes and electrifying their whole home. And so we're trying to pivot that program. We're in the middle of a strategic review of the program that will make it, as I say, more accessible, but also more attractive for some of those bigger investments. So if you think, for most of us in Victoria, we heat our homes with gas and predominantly ducted gas heating, which is increasingly inefficient but incredibly expensive to run. And secondly, we're heating water. And for those two things, there are more efficient and cheaper versions now out there, including heat pump hot water systems for hot water, which can save between $100 and $200 per year, and for heating your home. If you combine the various rebates that are available under the Victorian Energy Upgrades, you can save between $120 and $1,000 a year. So essentially halving the average electricity bill by investing in energy efficiency. I wanted to just share some of our insights. So since we started, about 400,000 customers have benefited from the program, about 286,000, so the vast majority of them have taken up solar PV. About 17,000 have installed a battery, and about 27,000 Victorians have now installed a hot water heat pump, and Victoria is very much leading the charge, so to speak, around the country, with 2 record years in a row, the last 2 years of heat pump hot water being taken up. But what our customers tell us is that those Victorians, so 700,000 of them, we've supported just under 300,000, but 700,000 Victorians, about 1 in 3 freestanding homes, now have the benefit of solar on their rooftops. And what they're telling us is that they are looking to optimise that investment. And it's not rocket science, let's be clear. They've invested in the solar PV. For most of them, it's powering their TV and their lights, maybe their dryer and their washing machine. But if they're still connected to gas, it's actually not giving them the best return on their investment. And so transferring their heating and their hot water onto electricity, and then benefiting particularly from daylight solar, either programming their appliances to run during the day, heating their homes, doing all of those sort of things to optimise their investment. It increases the return on their solar system from about $700 per year on average to over $1,000, and that goes even higher with a battery, although for most of us batteries are still just that little bit too expensive. I won't go through all of the stats here, but I'm happy to explore some of these during the conversation. But essentially what our customers tell us is that almost counterintuitively, if you listen to the news or if you're reading the Herald Sun on the weekend, they're telling you that people want to stay on gas and they love gas and they want to cook with gas. It's just not the case. The people that have got solar in particular are telling us that what they want to do is get off gas and get it off as quickly as possible, because they know that the cheaper and cleaner and more sustainable version of that is that they heat their home. So around 2/3 of them are indicating that they are interested in heating their home with electricity, heating water, and then a slightly smaller percentage, but it's still about half of them saying that they're interested in moving their cooking onto the electric version as well. I wanted to just finish on 2 points, because hopefully with Mark and Tristan we can explore these things, because I wanted to come back to the fundamental thing about where are we heading and how do we cast our thoughts to the future in terms of what's going to happen to energy bills. And under our program, as I say, about 700,000 Victorians now have rooftop solar, but about 2 gigawatts has been installed under the program. It's almost 4 gigawatts across the whole of the electricity grid. And if you think of a power station in the Latrobe Valley, that 2 gigawatts is bigger than your lawn, and it's almost as big as Loy Yang. Rooftop solar is now the biggest single source of electricity in the national electricity market, and it will continue to be that way. And my view is that that presents a real opportunity for extracting more value for those customers. So rather than thinking of solar as a problem that needs to be solved because it's generating in the middle of the day and perhaps not at night, that's a real opportunity for innovation, and that we can look at actually treating those customers with respect and unlocking value out of that investment, including with some of those things on your last slide, Mark, and I'm really keen to explore that in the conversation. Looking at dynamic exports that allow people to export more than 5 kilowatts, thinking that just in just over a month, some of those early adopters, many of them in this room and at the Expo outside, who have benefited from solar for over the last 10 years with the premium feed-in tariff. That will come to an end on the 1st of November. And we know many of those are looking at upgrading their systems, replacing their systems, electrifying their homes. That'll be a real inflection point, I think. That'll create some demand, if you like, for a more dynamic approach to our energy bills that respects that this is actually a really incredibly important part now of electricity generation. It's not just about those individual homes, but collectively, that they're effectively operating as these massive power stations that are feeding our grid, and that not enough, I think, thought and energy has been put into how do we maximise the investment in the distribution grid, so those poles and wires that are feeding our homes, as opposed to the large transmission. Both are important, but I think there's huge opportunities to unlock value in the distribution grid that we're yet to explore. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your fantastic insights, Mark, Stan, and Tristan. I am hoping that the audience this afternoon has got a lot of questions. I can see lots of hands going up, which is fantastic. Great, I'm going to save mine. Let's start. Maybe there's...
I get this question a bit since I've been out public speaking lately, and I know how I'd answer it, but like in 3 sentences, no more. People ask me, if we're electrifying, where's the electricity going to come from?
Sorry?
So where's the electricity going to come from, and if you can answer in 3 sentences or less?
2025, half of Australia's electricity will come from renewable sources. So it'll be wind, solar, hydro. That's just based on projects that are already operational or under construction. So half by 2025. From there, we do encounter some constraints on ongoing growth due to the need to upgrade transmission. But I expect that the government's goal is 82% renewables by 2030. That is challenging when you've only got 6 years to play with. But if we've got 10 years to play with, it's, I think, more than achievable, especially with the coal closing. So I think really by 2040, we should be well within our abilities to be on 90% renewables by that sort of 2040 timeframe, certainly. Hopefully sooner.
Fantastic.
Sorry, that was not 3 sentences.
That's okay. The gentleman with the black jacket. Sorry. Thank you.
Have I read correctly the prospect of a private solar generator of energy being charged to export? Or is that fake information?
It's not in Victoria, but there has been a discussion about whether there would be a charge on exporting solar. The Victorian government has
so the
ruled it
generator
out.
Pays to export it?
Yeah, not in Victoria. The discussion is about, I think, and I'm not defending it, but as I understand the narrative, it's about a charge that would contribute to what needs to happen to the distribution grid for rooftop solar to be exported. And for most of us, about 2/3 of the solar that we generate is exported to the grid. It's not self-consumed. As I was saying, it's better for at a household level that they consume as much as they can because it's cheaper.
So in future trends for Victoria, how likely is that to occur?
I can't answer that, but the government has committed not to introduce it, at least in this pricing round. So every 5 years there's a pricing round. It is permitted by Commonwealth law. That's right, isn't it, Mark?
It's under the National Electricity.
Yeah, under the National Electricity Market, but the Victorian Government has said, at least for this pricing period, which goes to 2025, that there's no deal here.
It's actually to 2031 it's going to be.
That commitment?
Yeah, that commitment in Victoria.
So you don't have to worry about it to 2031 in the case of Victoria. New South Wales distributors are introducing a charge for exporting. I think that reflects the fact that their government is not on the ball like this, the Victorian government, and they lacked good transparency on what was going on in the network, whereas in Victoria, because we've had a smart meter rollout, we have full transparency on what is going on in the network. And what was clear is that there was a lot of room to improve voltage management in Victoria. We probably also have the room to do that in New South Wales, but they just didn't collect the data because they didn't have the smart meter data being funneled through to the distributors. And quite frankly, I just think the New South Wales government tends to side with the electricity networks in most cases, is my personal opinion on that. And if they'd actually done some more thorough scrutiny like the Victorian government, they probably would have said, actually, this is not a good case for this.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. So I believe you've said that by next year, 50% of the electricity will come from renewables, and also that 1/3 of Victorian homes have electrified to some extent. I just am curious because when I read about these things in the press, it still seems very much like this is a kind of a niche agenda, but what you're saying, the numbers are that you've given out don't demonstrate that at all. Do you feel like there's still that disconnect in terms of the way that these programs are or the electrification is represented?
When you look at what happened, so in 2015, I think we're about 16% renewables, and in the space of 10 years, we're going to be, if we're not 50%, we'll be darn near close to it. And the reality is that we can scale up wind and solar incredibly quickly. The only thing that's slowing it down is transmission lines. The Chinese solar manufacturing capacity right now is 2 terawatts per annum. To put that in perspective, 1 terawatt per annum. To put it in perspective, the total aggregate installed coal in the entire globe over the whole entire history is 2 terawatts. So that's how much they're capable of producing every single year. And guess what? They're expanding. They're adding more factories. That just shows you the ability for us to scale these industries incredibly quickly. The challenge with transmission is partly a construction issue, but it's actually more an issue around doing the environmental studies to look at impacts on various different endangered species, for example, making sure that communities are engaged on, okay, exactly where are we going to put them? Is there some scope for some flexibility here such that we can minimise the impact on you as a landholder? There's a range of things like that. There's also some economic reviews that need to be taken place to make sure that, well, I don't know whether we do that good a job, to tell you the truth, but to try and ensure value for money. All of those things may slow down that transmission build, plus everyone around the globe decided they all needed to build transmission, and so the transformer manufacturers now have a waiting list as long as your arm. So that's been another challenge. But in terms of the solar and the wind, the ability to scale that up has been quite staggering on a global basis, but also in Australia. And look, Why do the press not have an understanding of that? Some journalists have a great understanding of it, but some don't, and some have editors that tell them not to have a good grip on it.
I think also we heard from some of the other panels that there's a lot of vested interests in the existing, coal and gas industry and lobbyists, and that has created quite a lot of issues in how we fast track the build out of renewables, but also transmission. It's been very political as a result.
Thank you very much, panel. I'm one of those customers that's become an electricity generator through my rooftop solar, and I've noticed the trends in the rooftop solar as well as EV. My question relates to whether there will come a day where we will have local grids or local availability for contribution back rather than getting no or negative tariffs for contribution back, whether we can have local grids or local sharing with my neighbours who don't have rooftop solar or using my EV to actually contribute to my energy use rather than getting a battery.
I think it's probably a great question for Mark, but just on, it was kind of what I was suggesting, which is I think there's a lot of untapped potential there in terms of the distribution grid and how we think about that in a much more creative way that respects the role of rooftop solar as now the largest single form of energy generation. And so we have to think of it as essentially this huge power station. It's just distributed. But I think there are ways of optimising it. One is to allow people to export more during the day but then curtail it at times when that needs to happen or in emergencies. And I think those capabilities are now being built, and we will on the 1st of October introduce what's called the emergency backstop, which I think is a bit of a misnomer, although it will be used in emergencies to stop solar exporting to the grid. It actually gives them the same capability, distribution businesses the same capability of allowing flexible export so that they can toggle up or down at different times of the day. And then I think that starts to create new opportunities of how do you value and price that for those customers, and how are they using their power and how might they export at different times and respond to price signals. And how might you optimise and automate those homes to do that? And I think there are options like what you're talking about, which include neighbourhood batteries, includes virtual power plants, and there are scenarios and examples internationally that include valuing a different tariffs for community power, community generated power and community used power as well. So I think all of those options are open, but I think we're still at the very start of looking at how do you optimise it in that way. Have you had anything to add?
Yeah, just to mention, in terms of community batteries, which is does have the potential to have that sort of neighbourhood sharing. They are in the very early stages, I guess, at this stage of being installed, and I guess different operating models being explored. So it's probably too early to anticipate how that will develop, but there is a potential for those to provide that sort of community type scheme you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. On the vehicle to grid, so you were talking about an electric vehicle then being able to export power to your home or to your grid. The issue is that in developing any kind of standard, each manufacturer will usually have a particular commercial interest about what they would like the standard to represent. And so there's a challenge getting those manufacturers to agree. And the other issue is also different countries have different interests as well. And so the feedback is they will reach a standard and they will reach an agreement. It should be within the next few years on that. If you already have an electric vehicle, though, it may not be compatible with the standards, so you might have to upgrade your car. Or do you have a vehicle to load car, or what sort of car have you got? Is it a Tesla or is it something else? Oh, okay. Unfortunately, you're probably going to need to upgrade your car. I have a car that has vehicle to load capability, and there is actually a piece of kit you can get now that enables you to do vehicle to home, but it's a very niche at the moment, and the guy's only making it available on a trial basis. But that functionality is there now for a limited. It has constrained functionality though. It's not like it can just power your whole home. It can only power 3 circuits and has some other constraints. But I think, look, in terms of the technology, we have the technology. The inverter is sitting within the car already, like your solar inverter. There is an inverter sitting in that car that can convert from AC to DC and go backwards, so it can then export back. Vehicle to load cars, they already have that functionality there. So the technology is here. It's just a matter of agreeing on the standards such that we can manage the quality of the power that is then exported to the grid.
Thanks, panel, for your enlightening presentations. I live in an apartment block that has an embedded electrical network, and it has 2 owners' corporations, one servicing the common area, one serving the residential. I went down the path of solar for apartments earlier this year, and I was told that I'm ineligible for the rebate because it's an embedded network in our building. Why is this so?
Yeah, you're right. So embedded networks host their own electricity and they charge you through that. And the government's taken the view not to extend the program to embedded networks at the moment because there's no guarantee that the benefits will be passed in full to those customers. And our program is designed on the basis that all of the benefits of that solar are shared individually with the individual unit holders. And then the common property. And the common property can only have the same share as every other apartment. And we weren't able to achieve that guarantee in the embedded networks because of the, I guess, the construct of how an embedded network works.
We've seen Ausgrid recently trialling demand tariffs for residential customers. Could the panel comment on whether we're likely to see that roll out more broadly and what the Victorian Government's view is on ensuring that customers will continue to have control over the tariffs that are being set or charged by the distributors?
Yeah, so the Victorian distributors have not gone down the path of demand tariffs for residential customers. We're already proposing a set of tariffs, our tariffs, up until 2031, and there's no plans to introduce a demand tariff. We don't actually think they're a good idea. So I guess that's the situation now.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification for you, Stan. You said that 79% of solar home customers are familiar with the concept of home electrification, and then you had some other stats, for example, that 50% plan or have replaced their gas stove with electric or induction cooktop. Is that 50% of the solar homes of the 79%, which is... sorry. So solar homes in Boroondara, yeah, getting myself mixed up. Solar homes in Victoria, I think is in Boroondara is about 14%. So you're saying that 50% of those 14...
It's just of our customers. So about half of them say that they're thinking already about upgrading. So if you think of a home in Boroondara that has solar, then that percentage of them would be interested in upgrading to electricity.
Yeah.
But I think we heard earlier from Mark that it's a really interesting conundrum that the closer you get to inner Melbourne, the less likely you are to have solar. And I think Boroondara might be sitting at around 10 or 15% penetration, which would be consistent with that sort of inner ring. But if you look at a suburb like Tarneit or Pakenham or Clyde North or Craigieburn, so outer ring suburbs, about half of the homes have solar. Mm-hmm. And yeah, for some reason, the closer you get, and it may be the heritage features, it might be, that there's more trees and more overshadowing or apartment buildings next to, so there's a variety of reasons that you wouldn't get solar, but it is interesting that as you get closer, you're less likely to have it. But we do say, and kind of my point was that solar homes are primed to make that next leap towards electrification because they're generating their own power and they can benefit the most.
Thank you. Thanks for really lots of information there. Given that I'm understanding that one of the limits on renewable development in large scale will be the transmission to move the energy from where it's generated to where it's used. Given that there's plenty of capacity to build, to produce solar panels, can they be put inside the distribution network backed with batteries? And if the answer to that question is yes, like on factory and large warehouse roofs, and if they can be done with the distribution system, what is the potential for doing that to reduce electricity bills for people in cities? And I guess because of even power pricing, I understand right across the state that it reduced power prices right across Victoria.
So I am aware Victoria University have just done some research into looking at the potential for rooftop solar on commercial industrial sites. I know that there's a lot of potential. I don't know how big it is, but I believe it's a lot. But I guess and they're proposing some sort of, government, change in government policies and rebates to encourage that solar to be installed.
I'm aware of that research, but for you guys who are actually in the industry, does that ring true? Does that seem like a reasonable thing with your knowledge?
Yeah, so we actually provided them with some of the data that they used in terms of the solar potential.
Yeah, I think it was the point that I was making earlier about optimising the distribution network. So if you think about the amount that is invested in large-scale transmission and then the distribution network is 3 times more valuable than the transmission network. So there's huge potential and opportunity, and over the last 10 years, the Australian Energy Regulator has indicated that the utilisation of that network has been coming down. So in other words, it's becoming less efficient, not more efficient, less productive, not more productive. And so there's opportunity to unlock value in that. There are regulatory barriers for distribution businesses to be also generating or storing power, etc. But my understanding is that the AER is indicating that it is very open to regulatory carve-outs to allow distribution businesses to play a much bigger part. So I think it will happen. It's just a question of how and when.
Yes.
You'd think because it's generating clean electricity that it would, but obviously it depends on...
So the Australian Energy Regulator publishes the wholesale electricity price report twice a year. The most recent one that they published where electricity prices in general, not just in Victoria, across the whole national electricity market has come down. And the main factor to that is the increased take-up of rooftop solar and batteries on commercial and industrial sites. One of the key challenges, though, for that, even though it's untapped potential, there's not a lot of policies and focus on that. So there needs to be a lot more in that space. So you're right. One of the biggest problems also is a lot of these sites are rental properties, warehouses and things like that. So they face very similar challenges to rental properties in homes and small businesses. We might take the question from the gentleman down the back.
Yeah, just picking up on that, there's a 10 megawatt behind the meter installation on a warehouse in New South Wales, and there's 20 megawatt installation on one of the water treatment sites in Victoria. So the idea that there's some shortage of potential to put huge amounts of power behind the meter to supply into the distribution network is just wrong. I mean, it's just nonsense. We actually had a lot of footprints at ETG that I'm part of. We ran a small exercise a few weeks ago. We looked at available rooftops around here on commercial buildings, and it's just enormous. There's actually quite a few already. There's enormous scope for putting panels on roofs here. But just expanding from that, given that there is this potential to put a lot of power behind the meter, and that immediately means that a fair bit of the load's being satisfied at replacing grid, a grid supply rate, so that the financial return goes up and so on and so forth. Why are we still pushing things like renewable energy zones for solar? I mean, it's just ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. Socially divisive transmission, by the time the power leaves that renewable energy zone and hits the customer, it's incredibly expensive because it's had all these other costs added to it. Why don't we just focus on behind the meter for solar? I don't understand it. It's clearly the sensible, rational policy.
I'm happy to talk to it. The solar farms are not really the most sensible economic investment for the private investors themselves, and I think a number of investors are licking their wounds that have invested in. Well, if it was not for Vladimir Putin, they'd be licking their wounds, but he's helped them out. And most of the focus of I would say the diversified, sophisticated, large-scale renewable energy investors is focused on wind. And we do need wind. It does provide generation. We're doing exceedingly well in daytime electricity being supplied from renewables, and as a consequence, electricity prices are incredibly low for a large proportion of the year during the daytime. And so large project developers go, okay, I don't want that. That price is negative in the wholesale market. What I want is the price that's really high between 4 o'clock and 9 o'clock, or even extending out to 12 midnight. And so naturally they're gravitating towards wind projects. The challenge with wind projects is they do need new transmission to exploit them. And the other challenge is there's a balancing act between wind and solar plus storage. If storage is incredibly cheap, which it isn't yet, then you start seeing a rebalancing and you might go, actually, I'm not going to do as much wind and we'll just invest in large-scale storage, or we'll invest in storage behind the meter to balance out that solar. But at the moment, the economics you look at it and you go, prices are just really low. We've got heaps of electricity in the middle of the day, and we need more renewable electricity in those other time periods, and you either do it through storage or you do it through wind, and wind's been the more economically attractive option to fill out those time periods outside of daytime.
Or you do it through load shifting, which again hasn't had much emphasis from all. It's nice to hear someone from South Victoria picking up on that, but there's an overall emphasis from governments up until now.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that, and I think with electrification, the opportunities for load shifting become greatly enhanced as well. But it is I think electric vehicles are really the one. If they start, they should take off, given we have a vehicle emissions standard that's being introduced that's steadily going to force emission reductions in passenger vehicles. So the issue will be, hopefully we roll that out intelligently and we encourage people to charge those cars in times, ideally during the day.
Well, I wouldn't mind asking just one quick follow-on, and that's if the distributors are allowed to compete with behind-the-meter solar, which is what the Energy Networks Australia has proposed in that paper they just released. I mean, there's so many clear governance issues and conflict of interest issues there. I mean, how are you going to manage the dynamic operating envelopes and connections if the distributor's actually making money competing directly with behind-the-meter installations on their customer sites? I mean, seriously?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good, it's an important issue to raise. I mean, right now that there are the ring fencing rules that prohibit distribution networks from entering into any competitive markets unless they have a separate business to take these initiatives in. But Mark, do you have any comments on any of that?
Yeah, well, currently we're prohibited. At the moment, we're not trying to do anything. I'm not too familiar with what the ENA is proposing, to tell you the truth.
I would just say to everyone, we should be terrified of the idea that electricity networks would be able to openly participate and get involved in rolling out rooftop solar, because the issue is that connection to the network is an incredibly powerful thing if you want to generate your own power, right? They've absolutely got you if they can absolutely use that against you if they are also want to do it themselves.
Yeah.
And that's why we have ring fencing rules in place that are meant to prevent them from doing that. And the fact that they are lobbying to remove those ring fencing rules, maybe not CitiPower, but other distributors, is very concerning. And I know that Ergon just got a waiver, which is a Queensland distributor from those ring fencing rules for a behind-the-meter installation, which is very concerning.
Yep.
And it's something that we should... I know that most people in this room probably go, what the hell's ring fencing? But it really is important that network distributors just stay as network distributors and aren't competing with other people that want to connect solar, whether that be households or large businesses.
Oh, hi. Yes, as you say, the price of power in the middle of the day is very low, and the price of generating power has dropped dramatically in the last year. It doesn't seem like the price is being passed on to the consumer. And, you know, there's no cheap tariff in the middle of the day, and general prices haven't really dropped.
It's probably a good question to say, you know, one, to end the session on, and going back to the topic of the day, which is what does the future trend for energy bills look like? So throwing it out to all three of you from a analysis perspective, government perspective, and network perspective, how do you see the bill evolving? Do you think that we will ever see true cost-reflective bills for our energy? Do we see that bills will just disappear and we have, you know, through our electricity rates? What do you see the future for bills are? Who wants to go first? And then we're going to end the session.
Yeah.
The final thing.
I'll just talk from a network perspective first. So we have been trialling a network tariff called Daytime Saver, which has free electricity in the middle of the day. And we're proposing to roll that concept out across from 2026 as a standard for our time of use tariff, which is charged to retailers, I should say, so that retailers don't necessarily have to reflect that to customers. Nevertheless, the bulk number of our customers in CitiPower's 80% are still on a tariff that's just a flat rate. It's the same rate all day. When we design our tariffs, we need to take into account sort of community and stakeholder views. And at this stage, communities either want not to have to think about price signals or have something that's very easy to understand. So until we can have sort of technology take over and make decisions on behalf of, so customers don't need to make decisions, I think we'll have very simple tariffs.
What I'd say is going back to the basics that renewable energy leads to lower wholesale energy prices. It might not feel that way when you get your retail bill, but in the last 12 months, the Victorian default offer, which is that kind of standard setting piece, reduced by $200 off the back of essentially lower wholesale prices, and we enjoy some of the lower wholesale prices in the country. My job is very much to focus on how do we support households to take control of their own destiny, and if they can, that solar is the best thing that they can do. Obviously, energy efficiency along that, and then in our advocacy work and our research is demonstrating how we might be able to unlock more value out of that.
I'm optimistic that batteries will finally become a very affordable and low-cost option. And when that happens, we'll all stop talking about our energy bills.
Yeah, that's a good one to end the session on. I do want to thank Carolyn and the Electrify Boroondara for and all the volunteers for setting up such an amazing day this year and last year. Thank you to our stellar panel and their wonderful insight. And none of this is actually possible without the people like yourselves who come to these events, who do take up the technologies, who do want change to really affect change. So thank you all for today. Really, really.